At the F-rank registration desk, Cho Dae-jun had stopped processing Kale's completion forms with the standard expression. Not because the expression had changed, it hadn't. But because something in the cumulative kill count column had begun producing a number Cho's 11 years of F-rank processing experience had no reference point for, and the expression required a baseline of comfortable condescension that Cho was finding increasingly difficult to maintain while looking at a figure that now read 28,400,000 total confirmed kills. He had called Financial Review twice more since day 14. Both times he had been told the account would flag automatically at threshold. Both times he had stamped the next form and moved on. On gate 29, something changed in the tunnels that had nothing to do with Kale's protocol. He was 12 minutes into a slow entry run. Population estimate 1,600,000, calculated threshold 28,000 per minute, actual pace holding at 22,000, when the worker movement pattern in the deeper tunnels shifted. Not the military caste mobilization he had learned to identify by sound. Something different. A reorganization of the worker columns that didn't match any defensive behavioral profile in the literature. The colony was not responding to his kill rate. It was responding to his pattern. He stopped moving, stood completely still in the tunnel for 40 seconds, watching the worker columns reorganize around the radial path he had been cutting. The column that should have been flowing through the eastern branch had rerouted. The workers in the northern approach had reversed direction and were moving deeper rather than surfacing. The colony's internal traffic was actively avoiding the geometric path his protocol followed. The hive intelligence had learned his entry pattern. Not from gate 29 alone. From every gate in this district cluster that shared biological communication channels through the soil substrate. A connection the survey literature mentioned as a theoretical possibility for gates within 200 meters of each other. 5 of his booked gates fell within that radius. The hive intelligence wasn't operating at individual colony scale anymore. It was operating at cluster scale. He exited gate 29, sat in the parking structure, opened the survey data and mapped the 200-meter radius clusters across his remaining gate list. 5 gates compromised. 3 isolated. The isolated 3 would run clean on standard protocol. The 5 cluster gates would require a fundamentally different approach. Not a slower entry pace, but a different geometric pattern entirely. One the cluster intelligence had no prior data on. He had no prior data on it either. He would have to develop it inside the gates. Gate 30 was the first test. He entered with no fixed protocol, no predetermined radial pattern, no calculated pace. He moved by observation, watched the worker columns, identified the avoidance zones the cluster intelligence was creating, moved into the gaps between them, killed in the spaces the colony was leaving undefended because it was defending against a pattern he was no longer using. Kill confirmed times 1, 800. Kill confirmed times 3, 200. Kill confirmed times 5, 100. The military caste stayed dormant. The workers died in the gaps. The colony's defensive reorganization was built around a threat model that no longer existed. He was operating outside the model. Gate 30 total kills, 1,940,000. Payment, $19,400. Best net of any cluster gate so far. He updated the document. Added a column labeled adaptive entry for cluster-flagged gates. Booked gate 31. His left-hand grip had deteriorated another measurable increment since gate 28. He switched to a 2-finger dispenser trigger to compensate. The tunnel walls left marks on his right shoulder now from navigation contact. A new damage pattern from the left-hand switch. He noted it, kept moving. Cumulative count after gate 30, $2,870,000. The $500,000 quarterly flag had already fired 11 days ago. He hadn't known that when he entered gate 30. He found out when he checked his system wallet on exit and found a notification he had been expecting since day 3 of the operation. The one debt sense had been warming him about since he first read the 72-hour notice requirement in the founding charter's compliance subsection. Account status. Payment processing suspended. Compliance review initiated. Not a freeze. Not yet. A suspension pending formal freeze order, which, under Hunter Employment Law subsection 31b, required 72-hour advance written notice to the permit holder before taking effect. They had 72 hours to issue the notice. He had 72 hours before the notice landed. He pulled up his gate booking list. Counted the gates he could physically clear in 72 hours given current burn schedules and adaptive protocol timing. For gates, maybe 5 if gate 31 ran clean and his grip held. He drove to gate 31. The freeze notice arrived on the morning of day 32, not as a system notification, as a physical document, printed on Hunter Association letterhead, delivered by registered courier to Kale's apartment at 7:14 a.m., requiring a signature on receipt. Standard compliance procedure for formal payment suspension orders. The courier was professionally neutral about the whole thing, the way people are professionally neutral when they deliver documents whose contents they don't know and whose consequences they don't care about. Cale signed for it, opened it at the kitchen table. The document was 4 pages. Cover letter, payment suspension order, compliance review timeline, appeal procedure. The cover letter was signed by the association's district compliance director. The suspension order cited anomalous payment volume under F-rank classification, referenced the quarterly flag threshold, and specified a 90-day review period beginning from the date of notice. 90 days. He read the compliance review timeline. 30 days for initial case assembly. 30 days for panel review. 30 days for ruling deliberation. Standard procedure for high-volume payment anomaly cases. Designed, the document explained, to ensure thorough and fair assessment of all relevant factors. He read the appeal procedure. Appeals could be filed within 14 days of the suspension order. Appeal review added an additional 60 days to the timeline. 150 days total if he appealed. 90 if he didn't. His mother's ventilator cost $900 per day. His liquid cash after supply costs from the previous week's gate runs, $340. He had pre-booked gates through day 38. The suspension covered payment processing, not gate access. His certification was valid. His permits were current. Nothing in the suspension order revoked his right to operate under his existing gate authorizations. He read the document a 3rd time, specifically the compliance review timeline section, specifically the procedural requirements subsection on page 3. Debt sense had been warming since the courier knocked. By the time he reached page 3, it was the same intensity as the founding charter clause. Not the low persistent warmth of a load-bearing detail, but the full furnace frequency of something that changed the calculation entirely. Subsection 7c of the compliance review timeline. Payment suspension orders issued under anomalous volume review protocol must be preceded by a mandatory 72-hour advance written notice period delivered to the permit holder's registered address before suspension takes effect. Failure to comply with this procedural requirement renders the suspension order unenforceable for the duration of the non-compliance period. The freeze notice had been delivered this morning. Day 32. The automated payment flag had fired on day 21. He knew this because the suspension notification had appeared in his system account on day 30, the day he had driven to gate 31 after reading it in the parking structure. The association had taken 9 days between the flag firing and the freeze notice arriving. The 72-hour notice was supposed to precede the suspension, not follow it by 9 days. He checked his system account. Payment processing had been suspended from day 30, the day the account notification appeared. 2 days before the formal written notice arrived today. The association had suspended payments first and issued the written notice after. In direct violation of subsection 7c, the suspension was procedurally unenforceable. He had been operating in the unenforceable window for 2 days without knowing it. He had 3 gates completed in that window, gates 31, 32, and 33 with payments blocked. Those payments were owed. The procedural error didn't just make the suspension unenforceable going forward. It created a back payment liability for every gate cleared during the non-compliance period. He set the document down, looked at the kitchen ceiling for a moment. Then he called the Hunter law firm. Not a consultation line, not an intake form. The direct number for the senior partner who specialized in association compliance disputes. A number he had found 3 weeks into the operation while building his legal map, saved under if needed in his phone contacts. He had hoped not to need it. The call lasted 22 minutes. The lawyer, a former association compliance officer named Ji Soo-yun, who had left the association under circumstances she described only as irreconcilable procedural differences, listened to the full sequence without interrupting. When Cale finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, they issued the suspension before the written notice? By 2 days. Another pause. Do you have the system account notification timestamp? Day 30. The written notice is dated today. Day 32. Send me both documents. I'll have a response filed within 6 hours. He sent the documents. He drove to gate 34. The review wasn't his problem anymore. Ji Soo-yun's problem now was the procedural error. His problem was the 19 days of gate clearing he was about to do unpaid, because even if the suspension was procedurally unenforceable, back payments wouldn't release until the compliance ruling cleared, and the ruling wouldn't clear until the review ran its course, and the review would run however long the association's compliance board decided to let it run regardless of what the procedural error meant for the final outcome. He had $340. Gate 34 entry. Adaptive protocol. Cluster gate. The intelligence had been developing across this district for 3 weeks now, and the geometric pattern he had used at gate 30 was already partially anticipated. He could feel it in the way the worker columns moved on entry, not avoiding his exact pattern, anticipating where his pattern would go next. He changed direction 4 times in the first 6 minutes. Not randomly, reading the column movements, identifying the defensive gaps the cluster intelligence was creating in response to its own predictions, moving into the spaces between what it expected and what he did. Kill confirmed times 1, 200. Kill confirmed times 2, 900. Kill confirmed times 4, 400. Military cast dormant. Column movement confused. He pushed to maximum output at minute 19. Kill confirmed times 8, 700. Kill confirmed times 11, 200. Exit at minute 43. Total kills, 1,780,000. Payment blocked. Supply cost, $4,100. Net cash position after resupply, negative $3,760. He paid for the resupply on a credit line he had opened against the pre-suspension account balance. The credit limit was $8,000, enough for approximately 2 more full resupply cycles before it maxed out. He drove to gate 35. The compliance board received Ji Soo-yun's filing that afternoon. The filing documented the procedural violation in subsection 7c, attached both timestamp records, cited 3 prior association compliance rulings in which identical procedural errors had resulted in accelerated review timelines, and requested an emergency ruling within 11 days rather than the standard 90. The compliance board assigned the case to a 3-person panel. Standard procedure. One of the 3 panel members was the district compliance director who had signed the original suspension order. Standard procedure. The issuing officer participated in review of contested orders. The second panel member was a senior association lawyer with no prior involvement in the case. The third was Cho Dae-jun, included as the district ranking officer of record for Kale's gate assignment history. Ji Soo-yun called Kale after gate 35 to tell him about the panel composition. He was sitting in the parking structure eating the one meal he had budgeted for the day. Cho Dae-jun is on the panel, she said. I know who he is, Kale said. He submitted a supplementary brief this afternoon, arguing that the kill counts in your completion forms should be independently verified before any ruling is issued, on the grounds that the numbers represent a statistical impossibility for an F-rank hunter operating solo. Kale looked at the gate 35 completion form on his system screen. 1,640,000 confirmed kills, all individually logged by the association's own system, each one carrying a timestamp, a gate ID, and an arthropod classification marker generated automatically by the kill confirmation protocol. The system logged every kill individually, he said. I know, Ji Soo-yun said. I told them that. Cho's brief is a delay tactic, not a legal argument. The panel will have to address it, which adds time. But it doesn't change the procedural violation. How much time? 3 days. Maybe 4. He did the math. His credit line covered approximately 2 more resupply cycles. Gate 36 and Gate 37 were within that window. Gate 38 would require either back payments releasing or a resupply he couldn't fund. File whatever you need to file, he said. I'll handle Gate 38. He booked Gate 36 for the following morning. DebtSense was running a steady burn on the compliance filing. Not the furnace intensity of the charter clause, but a sustained warmth that confirmed Ji Soo-yun's reading of the procedural error was correct and that the ruling, when it came, would go the right way. Gates 36 and 37 ran on depleted supplies and a deteriorating protocol window. The cluster intelligence had now been developing for 25 days across the 5 connected gates, and the adaptive pattern Kale had engineered at Gate 30 had been progressively anticipated to the point where the defensive gaps he was exploiting had narrowed from wide corridors to angles. He was moving through the tunnels in tighter and tighter geometric spaces, reading column movements with the same involuntary precision DebtSense applied to documents, a cross-activation that had been building since Gate 22 and that he had no formal name for. Gate 37 yields 1,420,000 kills. Payment blocked. Supply cost $3,900. Credit line remaining $340. Gate 38 was the one he had told Ji Soo-yun he would handle. He entered Gate 38 with 1 smoke canister, the last functional unit in his supply kit, everything else either depleted or acid damaged beyond usability, and a backup toolkit held together with equipment tape and the specific quality of maintenance that comes from knowing replacement is not an option. Left grip was down to 3 functional fingers. Right shoulder had a bruising pattern from tunnel wall navigation contact that had progressed from surface bruising to something deeper that produced a catching sensation when he raised his arm above shoulder height. He adjusted his entry stance to keep his right arm below shoulder level throughout the run. This reduced his dispenser range by approximately 30%. He entered anyway, The cluster intelligence hit him at minute 4. Not the military cast, the workers themselves, column movements reorganizing faster than any prior gate, the defensive gaps closing before he could move into them. The hive had stopped trying to predict his geometric pattern and started responding in real time to his actual position. A behavioral shift that the literature described as the highest tier of colony threat response, typically triggered only when a colony had sustained losses significant enough to register as existential rather than incidental. He had been killing their colonies for 25 days. They had decided he was existential. Military cast activated at minute 6. For directions, the same number as gate 22, but faster. The acid spray came before he had full visual on the soldiers. Left shoulder, upper back, catching him mid-turn. His jacket dissolved in patches. The skin beneath it registered the burn in the specific way that redamaged tissue registers. Not sharp, but total, a heat that occupied the entire surface simultaneously. He got out at minute 9. Gate 38 kills. 347,000. Payment blocked. Supplies gone. Credit line at 0. Net cash position. Negative $4,100. He sat outside the gate building for 2 hours on a concrete barrier with his jacket off, applying the last of his non-licensed medical supplies to the shoulder burns with his right hand. His phone rang at hour 2. Ji Soo-yun. The panel ruled, she said. 11 days like I asked. He waited. Procedural violation confirmed. Subsection 7. C. Non-compliance upheld. Suspension order ruled unenforceable from day 30. All blocked payments release within 24 hours. Back payments for gates 31 through 38 included. He looked at his shoulder. Looked at the gate building. Looked at the completion form on his system screen. 347,000 kills, the lowest single gate yield of the entire operation. Cleared with 1 canister and 3 functional fingers and a jacket that no longer had a left sleeve. Chose brief, he said. Overruled in the same session. Kill counts verified as system generated. His supplementary argument was dismissed without a formal response. He put the phone in his pocket. The back payments hit his system account 14 hours later. Total release, $3,100,000 across gates 31 through 38. Running cumulative after release, $5,970,000. He paid gate 39's supply costs in full. Booked gates 39 through 44, the final 6, in a single submission before he left the parking structure. Cho Dae-jun received the panel ruling notification at his desk the following morning. He read it twice, set it down, picked up his rubber stamp, looked at it for a moment longer than usual. Then he stamped the next form in his queue. Kale Mori's Gate 39 completion report. Gate 39 was the first gate of the final block. Not the first gate that mattered, they had all mattered in the specific way that things matter when they are the difference between a ventilator running and a ventilator not running. But Gate 39 was the first gate of the block Kale had booked before leaving the parking structure outside Gate 38. Jacket dissolving on one side, shoulder burns dressed with the last of the non-licensed medical supplies, back payments not yet cleared but coming. 6 gates. The number he had calculated as achievable before the association could mount a second legal action. The number Ji Soo-yun had confirmed was outside the immediate compliance window. The panel ruling had closed the procedural violation case, and opening a new suspension required a fresh anomaly flag, a fresh 72-hour notice, a fresh procedural sequence the association would not complete before his certification block ran out. He had 6 gates and a certification that expired in 11 days. The back payments cleared at 3 a.m. on the morning of Gate 39. He was awake when they hit, not waiting for them, just awake, the burn sites producing the specific quality of sleeplessness that doesn't respond to position adjustment or deliberate breathing or any of the techniques that work on normal discomfort. He saw the notification, looked at the total. Payment released, $3,100,000. Running total, $5,970,000. He set the phone down, tried to sleep for another hour, gave up at 4 a.m. and drove to the supply wholesaler, which opened at 5, and bought everything his resupply list required for gates 39 through 44 in a single purchase. Full smoke dispenser stock, full backup toolkit, medical supplies, licensed this time, because the shoulder required treatment that the non-licensed kit couldn't adequately address and because for the first time in 38 gates he had enough in the account to afford the licensed option. The licensed supplies cost 4 times more than the wholesaler kit. He bought them anyway. Gate 38 had shown him what operating on the non-licensed margin produced. He could not afford another Gate 38. Gate 39 entry at 7 a.m. Full supplies, right shoulder treated. Left grip still at 3 functional fingers, scar tissue compression, not acute damage, not improvable on a one-night timeline. He adjusted the dispenser configuration to compensate, the same 2-finger right-hand trigger he had developed at Gate 28, now practiced enough to be automatic. The cluster intelligence had been developing for 27 days. What he found inside Gate 39 was not the same problem he had been solving since Gate 22. The colony behavior at Gate 22 had been standard military threshold response. Gate 30 had been cluster-level pattern anticipation. Gate 34 had been real-time positional response. Gate 38 had been existential threat classification, the highest tier in the biological literature, the response profile colonies developed when sustained losses crossed the threshold from manageable attrition into survival-level crisis. Gate 39 was something the literature did not have a category for. The workers were not moving in defensive columns. They were not reorganizing around his entry point. They were not anticipating his geometric pattern or responding to his real-time position. They were still. The entire tunnel network, from the entry corridor to the deepest chamber he could detect, was completely still. Not dormant. Waiting. He stood at the tunnel entrance for 30 seconds. Det Sense was producing nothing. The ability had no calibration for biological systems, no clause to read, no legal weight to register. What he had instead was the cross-activation that had been building since Gate 22, the spatial pattern reading that the grinding pressure of 38 gates had carved into his nervous system alongside the burn scars and the grip damage. The same involuntary registration, the same physical signal, operating on tunnel geometry instead of legal text. The colony was not defending. It was baiting. The stillness was not absence of response. It was the response. Draw the threat deeper into the tunnel system, away from the entry corridor where exit was possible, then mobilize every available resource simultaneously from all directions at once. Not a threshold response. Not a pattern response. A trap. The hive intelligence had stopped reacting to him. It had started hunting him. He did not go deeper. He stayed at the entry corridor and worked the edges, the outermost worker ring, the tunnel walls within 20 meters of the gate entrance, the surface exposure the smoke could reach without requiring him to advance into the deeper network. Slower kills. Lower volume per minute. The bait stayed set and he ignored it completely, clearing the perimeter while the colony's prepared ambush sat loaded and untriggered in the chambers below. Military cast activated at minute 14, when the perimeter losses crossed the existential threshold. He was already moving toward the exit. He cleared 680,000 workers before the soldiers reached the entry corridor. Not his best gate. Not close to his best gate. But he exited clean. No acid contact. No gear damage. No medical cost beyond the morning's licensed resupply. He sat in the equipment bay and updated the document. New column. Bait configuration. Gates where the colony had advanced to trap-setting behavior required perimeter-only clearing, lower yield, guaranteed exit. The adaptive entry protocol was no longer the ceiling of the colony intelligence. He was operating against something that had moved beyond every behavioral tier the literature described, something that had developed in direct response to 38 consecutive gates of pressure from a hunter whose pattern it had been studying longer than any colony in recorded gate history had studied any hunter. This was what 38 gates of 1-cent kills had built on the colony side. He was curious, in a detached and operational way, about what it had built on his. Gates 40 and 41 ran on the perimeter protocol. Yields lower than the peak cluster gates but consistent, 720,000 and 810,000 respectively. Clean exits both. The bait configuration held across both tunnels, the colony intelligence apparently committed to the trap strategy regardless of whether it was working. He declined the invitation twice more without comment. His running total after Gate 41, $7,490,000. His kill count after Gate 41, 961 million. He looked at that number for a long time in the parking structure between Gate 41 and Gate 42. Not the money, the kills. 961 million individual confirmed kills across 41 gates. The system had been counting every one, logging every timestamp, filing every arthropod classification marker. The infrastructure built to handle S-rank guild raids had been quietly processing F-rank insect gate completions for 41 consecutive sessions without a single processing error, because the clause said what the clause said and the system did what the system was built to do. 38,999,000 kills from the threshold. He drove to Gate 42. Gate 42 was a residential classification. Small tunnel network, estimated population 900,000, no cluster connectivity, surveyed 8 weeks prior. The simplest gate profile on his remaining list. He had saved it deliberately, a clean run for a day when his shoulder needed the lower intensity. Standard slow entry protocol. Population adjusted threshold at 18,000 kills per minute. No bait configuration detected on entry. The colony responded like Gate 9, predictably within the study parameters, without the layered intelligence the cluster gates had developed. Felt after 41 gates almost easy. Almost. His left hand caught the tunnel wall at minute 22. Navigating a low ceiling section, and the grip compression produced a pain response sharp enough to make him stop moving for 3 seconds. Not the acid burn, the scar tissue. Gate 8's damage, compounded by Gate 22, compounded by 20 subsequent gates of tunnel contact, expressing itself as a single moment of complete grip failure that lasted 3 seconds and then subsided. He noted it, kept moving. Gate 42 total kills, 870,000. Payment, $8,700. Clean exit. Running total, $7,498,700. Kill count, 961,870,000. 37,130,000 from the threshold. Gate 43. This was the last cluster gate on his list, the 5th of the 5 connected gates, the one he had saved because its survey data showed the highest baseline population of any remaining gate and because he had wanted to run it last, when the cluster intelligence was at maximum development, to see what the final version of the problem looked like before he was done with it. What it looked like was different from gates 39 through 41. The bait configuration was still present, the familiar stillness of a colony that had learned to wait. But layered over it was something new. Worker columns at the tunnel perimeter were not fully still. They were moving in a pattern he had not seen in any prior gate, slow, irregular, non-defensive movement that didn't match foraging behavior or construction behavior or any of the documented colony activity profiles. It took him 4 minutes of observation to understand what he was seeing. The perimeter workers were mimicking the kill exposure pattern from Gate 30. The first gate where he had used adaptive entry, where he had moved into the gaps the colony created rather than following a fixed geometric path. They were recreating the exposure pattern from his most successful cluster gate run, presenting the same defensive gaps, inviting him to use the same approach. The trap was not a static ambush this time. It was a replica of his own best method, used as bait. The hive intelligence had not just studied his patterns. It had stored his most effective pattern and was now deploying it back at him as the lure. He stood at the entry corridor for 90 seconds. Then he did something none of his protocols covered, because no protocol he had built accounted for a colony intelligent enough to weaponize his own methods against him. He went completely still, shut down the dispenser, let the smoke clear, and waited. For 6 minutes he stood at the entrance and did nothing. The colony's prepared pattern began to degrade. The perimeter workers maintaining the replica exposure held position for 4 minutes, then began drifting, the biological cost of holding a non-standard formation without reinforcement signal becoming apparent as the hive intelligence waited for a threat response that wasn't coming. By minute 6, the formation had dissolved back into standard movement. The colony had run its best strategy and gotten no response. The hive intelligence had no contingency for a threat that simply refused to engage. He activated the dispenser at minute 7 into standard perimeter protocol. The colony had nothing left to deploy that it hadn't already shown him. Kill confirmed times 3, 100. Kill confirmed times 6, 800. Kill confirmed times 12, 400. Military cast mobilized at minute 19. Late, disorganized, the coordination signal degraded from 6 minutes of formation hold cost. He was already at the exit corridor when the first soldiers reached the perimeter. Gate 43 total kills, 1,940,000. The best yield of any gate since the cluster intelligence developed. Running total, $9,369,700. Kill count, 963,810,000. 36,189,190 from the threshold. 1 gate left. He drove to gate 44 the following morning without checking his system wallet, without reviewing the document, without running any calculation he had not already run. There was nothing left to calculate. Gate 44 was a mid-range classification, industrial district, survey age 74 days, cluster connected but the last of the 5, the cluster intelligence running on 4 depleted colonies and one that had just spent its best strategy on a 6-minute standoff that accomplished nothing. He suited up in the equipment bay. Full supplies, right shoulder holding, left grip at 3 fingers, automatic now, no longer requiring conscious compensation. He had cleared 43 gates on this grip. Gate 44 was not going to be the one that stopped him. Entry at 7 a.m. The tunnel was quiet in the way Gate 39 had been quiet. The bait was set. He could feel it in the spatial register that 43 gates had carved into him, the same involuntary signal det sense used on legal text now reading tunnel geometry without being asked. The cluster intelligence had one strategy left, and it was the only strategy it had ever successfully deployed against him. He ignored it. Perimeter protocol. Dispenser at threshold pace. Worker columns exposed and eliminated in the outer ring while the ambush waited in the deep tunnels for a threat that was never going to arrive. Kill confirmed times 2, 400. Kill confirmed times 5, 900. Kill confirmed times 9, 300. Minute 14. Kill count running at 34 million for the session. Running total crossing 997 million. Kill confirmed times 14. 800. Military cast activated. He was at the exit corridor. He kept the dispenser running. Perimeter still had workers, the outer ring not fully cleared, and the soldiers would take 90 seconds to reach his position from the deep tunnel mobilization point. 90 seconds of dispenser time at current rate. Approximately 1,800,000 additional kills. He held position at the exit corridor and ran the dispenser for 83 seconds. Then the first soldier mandible appeared around the tunnel corner and he stepped through the gate entrance. The system processed. Gate clear. Confirmed. The kill count notification loaded. He looked at it. Session kills, 36,190,000. Cumulative kill count, 999,999,999. Then the achievement notification. A display format he had never seen before, gold-bordered, occupying the full system screen rather than the standard notification band. Achievement unlocked, endless harvest. Condition, 999,999,999 confirmed kills. Arthropod classification. This achievement has not been previously unlocked by any registered hunter in the association database. Reward. Passive ability granted. Colony resonance. Classification. S-rank spatial awareness. Enclosed structure mapping. Threat vector prediction. Pattern recognition at biological scale. Note. Ability classification reflects biological. Adaptation accumulated across extended high-volume arthropod engagement. This is not a system-generated ability. This is a system recognition of an ability already present. He read the note twice. Not a system-generated ability. A system recognition of an ability already present. 43 gates of tunnel walls and kill rate calculations and colony pattern reading had not given him colony resonance. They had built it slowly in the specific neural architecture that forms when a body is subjected to the same high-stakes spatial problem 10,000 times in environments where getting it wrong means acid burns and dissolved gear and a 2-hour sit on a concrete barrier outside a gate building. The system had not rewarded him. It had looked at what 44 gates had made him into and assigned the classification it was designed to assign. He sat down on the equipment bay floor. Not dramatically, just sat. Back against the wall, system screen still displaying the gold-bordered achievement notification. Shoulder holding, left hand resting on his knee with 3 functional fingers pointing at nothing in particular. Payment processing, $9,999,999.99. He looked at that number. Then he called his mother's hospital billing coordinator. The association patched the clause 72 hours after gate 44. Not immediately. Not the same day the achievement notification fired and the payment cleared and Kale sat on the equipment bay floor with his back against the wall and 3 fingers pointing at nothing. They waited 72 hours, long enough to conduct an emergency legal review, long enough to draft the amendment language, long enough to consult with the guild representatives who had been calling the association chairman's office since the story broke on every Hunter news channel simultaneously at 9 a.m. on the morning after gate 44. The amendment read, arthropod kill rate payments are hereby subject to a minimum individual body mass threshold of 2 grams per confirmed kill. Colony-type arthropod gate encounters are reclassified as single-entity engagements for payment processing purposes. Effective immediately. 2 grams. That was the number they chose. The average worker ant weighed between 1 and 2 milligrams. The amendment closed the clause with a margin of 1,000 times the actual target organism's mass. Not precision drafting, but the drafting of people who wanted to make absolutely certain the door they were closing stayed closed. Kale read the amendment on his phone at the hospital. His mother's room. The first time he had been there in 11 days, gate schedules and supply runs and parking structure recovery sessions had compressed the visiting window to 0 during the final block. He sat in the chair beside her bed, phone in hand, shoulder dressed in licensed bandaging for the first time since gate 8, and read the amendment twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket and sat with her for 3 hours. The guilds moved publicly the following morning. Iron Peak's guildmaster, Songrak, 3rd-ranked hunter in the country, the man whose emergency petition to the association chairman had been among the first institutional responses to Kale's earnings, issued a formal statement through Iron Peak's media office. The statement described the insect gate payment incident as a systemic vulnerability that had been allowed to persist through inadequate F-rank documentation oversight. It called for a comprehensive review of all founding charter payment clauses. It suggested, in language careful enough to carry legal deniability but clear enough to carry intent, that payments made under exploited systemic vulnerabilities should be subject to unjust enrichment recovery proceedings. Unjust enrichment. The legal doctrine that allows recovery of payments made under circumstances the paying party could not have anticipated and would not have authorized had it known. Ji Soo-yeon called Kale at the hospital that afternoon. Iron Peak filed, she said. Unjust enrichment claim. Full payment recovery. They're also requesting the association join as co-plaintiff. Will the association join? Pause. The association's legal team is reviewing. Joining would require them to formally acknowledge the clause was a drafting error rather than valid policy. That creates its own liability problem. Because if it was a drafting error, Kale said, then every gate I cleared under a procedurally defective freeze order becomes a separate damages claim. Correct, Ji Soo-yeon said. They're in a difficult position. Joining the recovery claim validates your counterfiling. Not joining leaves Iron Peak to pursue it alone, which is a weaker case without institutional support. What's our position? 3 filings. Ready to submit whenever you confirm. He confirmed. The first filing was the procedural violation damages claim. Gates 31 through 38. Cleared under an unenforceable suspension order. Back payment delays constituting financial harm to a permit holder operating in good faith under valid certification. Calculated damages. $847,000 in interest and operational costs incurred during the freeze period. The second filing was the wrongful death compensation underpayment claim for his father. Park Mori, F. Rank Hunter, killed in a gate collapse 3 years ago. Compensation assessed at $180,000 under the standard F. Rank wrongful death formula. Debt Sense had registered the underpayment the day Kale signed the paperwork at 19 years old. Ji Soo-yeon's review of the original assessment confirmed it. The formula applied had used a standard non-dependent calculation despite Park Mori having a registered dependent, Kale, listed on his father's Hunter file as a minor at the time of the assessment. The correct formula, with dependent inclusion, produced a compensation figure of $2,480,000. The association had underpaid by $2,300,000. 3 years of interest on that figure, $414,000. Total claim, $2,714,000. The third filing was a counter to Iron Peak's unjust enrichment claim. The argument, the payment clause was not a drafting error. It was valid policy, ratified in the founding charter, administered by the association for 7 years without amendment. Payments made under valid policy do not constitute unjust enrichment. They constitute contractual obligation fulfilled. If the clause was a drafting error, the error belonged to the association, not the Hunter who read the clause and operated within its terms. Recovery from Kale would require the association to simultaneously acknowledge the clause was invalid, which would trigger the procedural violation damages claim and the wrongful death underpayment claim and several additional lines of association liability that Ji Soo-yeon had identified during 3 weeks of charter review and was prepared to pursue if the unjust enrichment claim proceeded. The counterfiling was 41 pages. Ji Soo-yeon submitted all 3 simultaneously on a Thursday morning. The association's legal team received them at 10:14 a.m. By 2 p.m. the same day, the association had formally declined to join Iron Peak's unjust enrichment claim. Iron Peak pursued it alone for 11 days. On the 12th day, their legal team contacted Ji Soo-yeon and requested a settlement conversation. The settlement took 4 days to negotiate. Kale was present for none of the negotiation sessions. Ji Soo-yeon handled them, calling him each evening with updates he received, processed, and responded to in under 2 minutes per call. He was at the hospital for most of those 4 days, in the chair beside his mother's bed, doing the thing he had not had the operational space to do for 44 gates. The final settlement terms. Iron Peak withdrew the unjust enrichment claim in full. The association paid the procedural violation damages, $847,000. The association paid the wrongful death underpayment with interest $2,714,000. All $9,999,999.99 in gate earnings confirmed as valid contractual payments, not subject to recovery. Total received $13,560,999.99. His mother's medical debt, $46,991,264. The gap was not closed by the settlement alone. It was closed by the combination. Gate earnings plus settlement, plus the payment forward schedule. Ji Soo-yeon had negotiated with the hospital's financial office as part of the broader case resolution, under which the hospital agreed to a structured payoff arrangement at 0 interest in recognition of the circumstances of the original debt accumulation and the documented association underpayment that had contributed to the family's financial position. The ventilator debt was cleared on a Tuesday. Kale was in the room when the billing coordinator called to confirm. He looked at his mother. She was awake. The first time in 4 days she had been consistently alert for more than an hour. She did not know the specific numbers. She knew something had changed. He did not explain the ants. The re-ranking committee convened 12 days after Gate 44. Colony resonance had triggered an automatic ability reassessment flag. Any newly registered ability classified above B rank required formal evaluation before rank adjustment could be processed. The evaluation committee consisted of 5 members. Their job was to assess colony resonance's classification, confirm its S-rank designation, and determine whether the ability met the threshold for rank reclassification of its holder. One of the 5 members was a familiar name in the documentation Kale received before the session. Cho Dae-jun had submitted a written objection to the re-ranking evaluation 14 days after Gate 44, the last day within the objection filing window. The objection cited 3 grounds: that colony resonance had been generated through a systemic exploit rather than legitimate combat development, that an F-rank combat classification could not be reconciled with an S-rank passive classification under existing rank framework guidelines, and that the achievement unlock mechanism had not been previously tested and its outputs should not be treated as equivalent to standard ability assessment results. The committee received the objection, logged it, assigned it a case number. Then they ran the colony resonance assessment. The assessment took 3 hours. Not because the ability was ambiguous, S-rank spatial awareness passives had a defined evaluation protocol, and colony resonance met every criterion without exception. 3 hours because the evaluators ran the assessment twice, the second time with an independent verification team, because the combination of an F-rank holder and an S-rank passive classification had never appeared in 7 years of recorded association history, and they wanted the documentation to be unambiguous. Both assessments returned the same result. The committee addressed Cho's written objection in the same session. The first ground, exploit-generated ability, was dismissed on the basis that the system note accompanying colony resonance explicitly identified the ability as a biological adaptation rather than a system-generated reward, and that biological adaptations developed through hunter activity were explicitly covered under standard rank assessment guidelines regardless of the activity type. The second ground, F-rank combat versus S-rank passive reconciliation, was dismissed on the basis that rank framework guidelines allowed for split classifications and that precedent existed for hunters holding different combat and passive rank designations. The third ground, achievement unlock reliability, was dismissed on the basis that the association's own kill confirmation system had logged every one of the 999,999,999 kills that triggered the achievement, and questioning the achievement's validity was equivalent to questioning the validity of the association's own logging infrastructure. All 3 grounds dismissed in the same session. Cho's objection was overruled at 4:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. Kale received the reclassification notification at 4:52 p.m. He was in the hospital parking structure, about to go up for the evening visit. Hunter rank updated. FS. Classification basis. Colony resonance. S rank spatial awareness passive. Effective. Immediate. He looked at it. Thought about the assessment results for his original awakening, the evaluator who had written non-combat, no value in the notes column, and moved on to the next file. Thought about the 11 guild recruitment desks that had pulled up the classification and ended the conversation. Thought about Cho's rubber stamp and the expression that had accompanied it every week for 2 years. The theatrical pity that required a baseline of comfortable condescension and had been losing that baseline since day 14 of the gate operation. He thought about Gate 8, the acid burn, the 2-year scar, the wholesale medical kit that wasn't enough and the license kit he couldn't afford until Gate 39 and the 3 fingers on his left hand that still didn't close all the way. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went upstairs. The following morning, Kale submitted a Freedom of Information request to the Hunter Association's Records Division. Gate permit history for Park Mori, F-rank hunter, registration active from 7 years ago to 3 years ago. Every gate his father had filed, every completion form, every kill count, every payment received. Debt Sense had been producing a low persistent burn on his father's file since the day he inherited the certification. The same low warmth it had produced on the founding charter's payment clause before he sat down and read page 848. The same warmth it had produced on the compliance timeline subsection 7C before the freeze notice arrived. He had been right about the charter. He had been right about the procedural error. He had been right about his father's compensation. The burn on his father's file had not stopped. He submitted the request, confirmed delivery, drove to the association building to collect his S-rank registration documentation in person, because the F-rank desk was in the basement and the S-rank registration office was on the 14th floor, and he had spent 2 years in the basement and he wanted to use the elevator that went to 14. Cho Dae-jun was at the F-rank desk when Kale passed through the lobby. Not by accident, the F-rank desk faced the main entrance, and Kale had to cross the lobby to reach the elevators. Cho looked up from his forms. Saw the S-rank badge on Kale's registration lanyard, the temporary credential issued pending full documentation processing, gold-bordered in the same way the achievement notification had been gold-bordered. The rubber stamp was in Cho's hand. The theatrical pity expression required a condescension baseline it no longer had anything to stand on. Cho said nothing. Kale pressed the elevator button for the 14th floor. The doors closed. The 14th floor looked exactly like the basement. Same association carpeting. Same fluorescent overhead panels. Same laminate desk surfaces and the same institutional wall color that someone in the association's facilities department had once decided projected professionalism and had never revisited. The S-rank registration office had better furniture. Chairs that didn't have foam showing through the armrests, a water dispenser that worked, but the fundamental architecture was identical. The difference was not the floor. The difference was who got off the elevator on it. Kale collected his documentation, signed the reclassification forms, received the permanent S-rank registration credential, the same gold-bordered design as the achievement notification, the same design as the temporary lanyard badge he had worn through the lobby past Cho Dae-jun's desk. He put it in his jacket pocket rather than around his neck. He would wear it when it was relevant. Right now it was a document, and he had spent enough time recently thinking about what documents were worth when nobody read them carefully. He knew exactly what they were worth. On the walk back to the elevator, he passed the S-rank guild recruitment board, a physical display, actual printed materials rather than the digital kiosk the F-rank desk used, because S-rank hunters were considered worth the printing cost. Iron Peak had a recruitment card on the board. Full color, guild crest embossed, contact information for the recruitment officer whose job it was to bring S-rank hunters into the fold. He did not take the card. Outside the association building, the city was doing what cities do. Moving, loud, indifferent to the specific sequence of events that had just concluded on the 14th floor of the building behind him. Hunters in guild gear crossed the plaza. A gate classification board on the corner displayed the week's active gate roster, color-coded by rank. The insect gate listings were in gray, the lowest display color, reserved for gate types with no active hunter interest. There were 11 insect gates listed. He looked at them for a moment, then looked away. The clause was patched. The gray gates would stay gray. What they had been for 44 days, the most productive gate type in his personal operational history, the financial instrument that had cleared $47 million in debt and returned his father's stolen compensation and reclassified him from the building's basement to its 14th floor, they would never be again for anyone. The window had opened once for one hunter, because one hunter had inherited a certification and an ability and a debt large enough to make the math worth running, and had been desperate enough to run it without stopping when the association tried to make him. The window was closed. He was fine with that. His phone buzzed. Ji Soo-yun, confirming the final settlement wire had cleared, and that the hospital's financial office had logged the structured payoff arrangement as active. He replied with 2 words. She sent back a single line. Your father would have found this extremely satisfying. He stood on the plaza for a moment with that. Then he put the phone away and thought about the Freedom of Information request, his father's gate permit history, every file, every completion form, every payment received across 6 years of F-rank insect gate work. Debt sense had been burning on that file since the certification transfer. Not the furnace intensity of the founding charter clause. Not the sharp signal of the procedural error. The low, persistent warmth of something load-bearing that had not yet been read carefully enough. He had been right about the charter. The procedural error. His father's compensation formula. The burn had not stopped. He did not know what was in his father's gate files. He did not know if it was another clause, another formula, another line of institutional text that looked like nothing until someone with the right ability stood close enough to feel the weight of it. He did not know if it was something the association had done deliberately or something they had simply failed to notice, the way they had failed to notice page 848 for 7 years because noticing required reading and reading required someone to believe the document was worth finishing. What he knew was that the burn had never been wrong. The system gave Kale Mori 1 cent per kill. A clause nobody read, behind a wall nobody could afford to cross, in gates nobody with options would enter. It gave him an ability every assessor called useless and every guild called worthless and every desk officer stamped past with theatrical pity for 2 years running. It gave him his father's certification and his father's debt and his father's files. And somewhere in those files, if the burn meant what every other burn had meant, something the association had been underpaying or misclassifying or summarizing rather than reading for longer than anyone had thought to check. The exterminator is not done. He never was. If you want to find out what's in his father's files, and what the association has been sitting on for 6 years without reading carefully enough, subscribe and turn notifications on. That burn has never been wrong. Not once. And it is not wrong now.